Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 96th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. And as you know, in June, the podcast has focused on corporate social responsibility. And today I am joined by an incredibly special guest who has set up a phenomenal scholarship scheme called the Cowrie Scholarship. And for me, this shows how we can all make genuine and meaningful change and get involved. The minute that I heard about Cowrie, I couldn't believe that A, I hadn't heard about it before, and B, I really wanted to be a part of this. So I'm delighted to say that I'm one of the businesses that is a partner that has been a sponsor for the Cowrie. My guest today is Professor Richard Orrefo. He holds the chair of musculoskeletal science and is a co-founder and director of the Centre for Human Development, Stem Cells and Regeneration at the University of Southampton. He has held positions in the USA, AstraZeneca, and the University of Oxford before being appointed to a lectureship in 1999 at the University of Southampton. Richard leads a multidisciplinary research group focused on developing strategies to repair bone and cartilage, with translation through to patient benefit a personal key driver. His research led to the first 3D titanium bone stem cell impaction graft operation in the UK. He has developed teams of clinicians and biomedical scientists transcending traditional disciplinary boundaries with a holistic approach to generate clinical impact. And Richard has trained over 52 doctors and PhD interdisciplinary scientists since 2002, and wait for it, published over 300 peer-reviewed papers. That is phenomenal, including breakthrough publications on skeletal stem cells, osteoarthritis, and bone regeneration, and he holds 7 patents. In 2015, he was awarded a Doctor of Science by the University of Oxford in Bone Regenerative Medicine. He is the founder of CSO Renovos Biologics Limited. In June 2020, he founded the Cowrie Scholarship Foundation, a partnership with universities, businesses, and donors to enable 100 disadvantaged Black British students attend UK universities in the next decade. He saw what was happening with Black Lives Matter and the wave, felt the timing was right, and this is something that Richard has been passionate about throughout his life and career. So I'm so delighted to have him on the show today. So Professor Richard Orrefo, a huge welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be on here.
It's a complete honor, and I'm so excited. And when we met earlier this year, we had such a great conversation. I thought I could not, I had to invite you to be a guest on the show.
Oh, well, such warm words. Where do we go? Start.
So Richard, I wondered whether we could start by you could tell the listeners a little bit about what made you become an academic.
Well, serendipity played a large part in that whole process. I think one thing is that I've always had a curiosity for learning and a passion, well, essentially to try and make a difference. In the early days, I was very fortunate to have mentors right from primary school, and that really brought out the best in me in what were some very challenging circumstances. And at Liverpool, one of my mentors was again brought me through biochemistry, brought me into something called vitamin A, for those of you interested in your vitamins. And from there, I went to Oxford to study vitamin A and bone. And I've had a love affair with bone biology ever since. And one of the things when I was at Oxford was trying to find the stem cell, and the stem cell that makes bone, and then how do we repair your bones? And as we get older, we have fractures, and we get osteoarthritis, we get osteoporosis. And I've been just fascinated for 2-3 decades now. We're trying to identify the bone stem cell and trying to find new ways of making bone and translating it through to the clinic. So I've been really, really lucky. If you like, it's been a serendipitous pathway where education has really transformed my life and has really provided an opportunity for me to make so many different changes and to have so many different effects, to train people, but actually to also have patient benefit, which comes back to this trying to make a difference. And that's why in some ways I'm so passionate about the whole education agenda. I sort of tell my students knowledge is power. And if you can then think about how you harness that power and how you can make a difference from discovery science to we did the first 3D printed hip implant in patients in the UK using the patient's own stem cells. It was just such an exciting thing to be doing. Anyway, I'll stop there.
No, well, it is phenomenal. I hadn't realized that was you and that was your team, the 3D printed hip replacement.
So it's interesting because when you start to do these sort of things, it's not, oh, we're going to be the first to do it. It just transpires that we had a wonderful orthopedic surgeon that we work with here in Southampton. We had the opportunity of harnessing the patient's own cells, trying out an operation. It's not a clinical trial, but it actually provided a platform for us for the first time to show that, yes, we could use a patient's own cells. Yes, we could use a 3D printed hip, and we could actually aid the mobility of patients.
And academia for Black academics can be a really lonely place. We haven't seen the numbers shifted. I've talked about this a lot on the podcast. I just wondered, what were your key leadership lessons being a Black academic, and what do you think you would tell your younger self now?
I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head. I mean, this is a statistic, and some of your listeners may or may not know. There are 23,000 professors. Okay, 1% identify as Black. That's 155. And there are only 300. I'm one of 300 of mixed heritage. I'm a Black British academic. And perhaps the most disheartening statistic of all is that there are, slightly more now, but 30 female Black professors. So there is this huge disparity, this lack of self-reflection in the field. When I started, so I've got a few decades on me now, when I started, it was mentors who told me. I remember Greg Mundy when I was in the United States. So when I was younger, I had lots of hair. And your listeners can't see this, but I used to have a really big afro. And he basically, Greg Mundy said to me, if you want to make a difference, you've got to rise to the top or rise as far as you can. And to do that, you've got to play the game. Of course, this is 1980s America. And so I put on the tie, I removed the afro, I joined the club. I'm not saying it's the right way to do it, but in 1983, 84, 85, when I was starting out in this space, I wanted to be the best that I could. I wanted to rise in the bone field, and I had to start to be taken seriously. And being an angry young person saying there isn't representation wasn't going to be the way to go forward. The way to go forward, as Greg told me, was rise as far as you can and then make a difference and then make the change from a position of strength.
And do you think that because of where you are now, then this has really been the catalyst at this moment to start the Cowrie Foundation?
It certainly was a huge driver. I wanted to give something back. I mean, education transformed my life. It's as simple as that. Some of your listeners may not know, but I was born in London. I went to Nigeria, and then I became caught up in the Nigerian Civil War. And my father actually had a scholarship at the University of Bristol, and my twin and I were actually stuck in the Nigerian Civil War, and we were evacuated a month before the war ended, and we grew up in Bristol, etc. And the rest is history, as they say. And education transformed my life, and I've seen the power and the lived experience that is education. And so, what I wanted to do was to try and give something back, was to try and make that opportunity available for other people. One of the sad things that I've come across over the years is that some of our, let's call them highly selective, high tariff universities are hugely underrepresented in terms of Black and minority ethnic students. And that's for a variety of reasons. And what I wanted to do was to make sure that the financial barrier wasn't an issue. Now, when I first thought about this a few years ago, it was so hard to get traction. But the tragic events that everyone will be aware of George Floyd last May, in 2020, really brought about a step change and empathy and outpouring of white and people of color, and there were protests, etc. And that's when I decided, well, the universities were all wanting to have a conversation to make a positive difference, and that was part of the catalyst, and of course the other thing was I wanted us to move beyond tokenism. I'm not sure that a black square on a social media platform made as big a difference as people think. It's very easy on a Sunday night to put on a black square, but how many people a year on have really followed through? Did they give any money? Did they undertake any activity? Did they try and make a difference? And that's really, it's a combination of those factors, and that really led me to establish the Cowrie Scholarship Foundation.
Thanks so much, Richard. And what do you think? If I could give you a magic wand, what does true racial equality in universities and education, what would that look and feel like to you in the UK?
Oh, well, it's actually, the answer is very simple. It's reflection of self. And whether it's in academia, in finance, whatever institution you want to think out, the problem is that isn't the case. We don't live in a meritocracy. Many people say, oh, no, academia. We don't live in the meritocracy. I gave you that statistic earlier on about 23,000 professors and 155 are black. Reflection of self just isn't there. And whether you're looking at law or in business, the Change to Race ratio are doing tremendous work within the CBI to try and increase the numbers of black and indeed black and Asian minority ethnics within our finance sector, for example. But we're hugely underrepresented. There's a 10,000 black interns program. But all of these things tell, the fact that we have the Cowrie Scholarship Foundation tells you how far we have to go. And that's just an observation of where we are today more than anything else. So the answer is simple: reflection of self, opportunity for all, real inclusion. I don't really mean this sort of token diversity, putting someone on a panel, but actually having. Sorry, I didn't mean that to be.
No, I think it's absolutely spot on. I'm laughing because we see that so often, don't we? Like, oh, we're having this panel about Athena Swan. We're having this discussion about the follow-on of Black Lives Matter, and someone's found when that person could have been speaking and involved in initiatives and activities along with others a long time ago. Yeah,
so it's absolutely, and recognition of that, and of course there'll be in academia you're judged very much on not only your teaching and your research and your publications and your grants, but actually when you're being rolled out to be on the EDI panel or to be the representative, it's often not recognized. It's often not accorded the kudos that should go with it. But of course, the universities will want to make sure that is the case. And I think we have to be careful that people gain the recognition for the work that they're trying to do in terms of real inclusion and real diversity, and to actually make sure that the agenda is engaged and meaningful. And that those are the sort of things that I do worry a little bit about.
And you mentioned meritocracy, and last year I did a podcast episode about the messy myth of meritocracy, and in light of the A-level scandal and what happened and how people were given predicted grades one moment by their teachers, then by the government, according to the school, and what a mess it was. So we know that there are lots of issues from nursery all the way up into tertiary education. So what do you think education as a whole could be doing to be more inclusive to Black students right now?
How much time have we got? I mean, there are some very simple things that certainly within the university sector that we could do. But of course, that means you have to have a good pipeline. You have to have the undergraduates and the postgraduates and then the academics. But equal opportunity, I think, is important. Allowing people to fail is something that doesn't happen. I often hear people say, I've worked twice as hard I don't have the luxury of failure. These are quite common phrases that you'll hear from people of color and from Black and minority ethnic individuals. And what would be nice is a chance for Black mentors to come through and be recognized for that, so that the students can actually aspire and see that it's possible. One way around it would be something like reverse mentoring, getting the students to talk to senior academics or senior staff and actually explaining what some of the real issues are. I think that's something that could be done. And if we go right back to the history that we teach our children, I think that's so important. So one of our ambassadors is actually David Olusoga, and he wrote a fabulous book, Black and British, A Forgotten History, and sort of the rich and diverse, sort of the tapestry of history that isn't brought out in our schools, and the need to understand colonialism and the slave trade, but more importantly, the history that existed before colonialism, and the fact that if we're looking at in Africa, that there's just a wonderful history that people just don't know about. It didn't just happen over the last 300 years. We're called the Cowrie Scholarship Foundation. One reason we're called the Cowrie is because as a form of currency, it was used for several hundred years across Africa and the Middle East. And that rich history across the Middle East and across Africa in trade and all of that is, I don't think people are really aware of that. There was I was sent a book by a close friend of mine, by Toby Green. It's called A Fistful of Shells. And again, he delves into that rich tapestry. And if we could actually try and get some of the work by, because I know that David Olusoga has in print for school children, Black and British, A Forgotten History. Mm-hmm. If we could actually start to delve into history right from an early age, so that it's normative rather than anything else, then I think that would make a huge difference.
I think you're right, and it really links into that single story, doesn't it? Around, as Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie says, who has the power, how the story's told. If you start a story secondly, how damaging it is. People don't know what the truth is, and it's accepted. And if you can reclaim those stories, there's actually so much positivity that can come from it.
I think we're now at the stage where, I don't know, someone suitably famous said, history is written by the victors, the champions of war, and that is true. But we're now in 2021 in a position to reflect on history and where we've come from, both the good and the bad, and to all the shades in between, and to embrace that. And it's part of the very fabric and nature of the society that we are, and to partition out areas that are perhaps not, that we don't think are appropriate or suitable, is to deny and to lose some of the things we need to learn from. And we should always learn from history, the good and the bad.
And I think definitely for me, Richard, it is about acknowledging the horrible things that have happened, as you've said, and who's been responsible for that. Because I think there is still so much fragility around it, and people see it as a good, bad binary, when it's all about how is the system continued? How is this system that benefits one group of people over another continuing? And what's my role in that? And that's what really appeals to me about Cowrie as well, the foundation and the work that you're doing.
Oh, well, that's really thank you so much. What we want to do is to level the playing field, no more than that. These students are wonderfully talented. They're not the only difference is that they will have financial stability provided by the Cowrie Scholarship Foundation. These students are still applying to all of the universities that are partners with us. They have to be selected by the university. They're there solely on their merit. What we're trying to do is to make sure that the financial barrier that stops so many entering our highly selective universities is removed, so that the tuition is covered by the universities, the living costs are covered by the donors and the businesses through the Cowrie, and we have a really strong, fabulous mentorship program. And so what all Cowrie is trying to do is to move the dial so that our disadvantaged Black British students can attend our university. I was fortunate, I'm of a certain age. I was paid to go to university. I received a grant. So this idea that you're going to walk away with a 50,000 debt, I went to university in the 80s. We didn't have that. We had grants provided, and that's a huge difference.
And that brings me to ask you also, of course, anyone who's been through any kind of financial strain, particularly around education, that's going to have an impact on mental health. And then if we also add into the equation belonging, cultural identity, being seen, how the system fits or doesn't fit you, this is often overlooked. So when it's done right, we know that the benefits are completely untold. But what do you think are some of the things, again, that universities could be doing to think about integrating these students once they're there? And I'm saying integrating them, it's not about them integrating actually, it's about changing systems. So how could the systems be better and more thoughtful? And also when it isn't done right, how mental health is impacted and mental ill health is likely to result in mental ill health.
It is complicated, but I think what's really important is that it's real inclusion, and this thing about there are no colour issues at our university, that actually is probably not helpful. I think if you're arriving at one of our universities, well, let's say you're coming to University of Southampton, and you're not able to see others like yourself, reflection of self, as I've talked about before, then that's challenging. And if we think about simple things like on the menu, have we thought about the menu that we're providing for all of our community? Have we thought about the societies? Have we thought about the finances? So you arrive at Southampton, or you arrive at York, you arrive at Glasgow, it doesn't matter, whichever university you arrive at. Joining societies is one of the great pleasures of being at university, but there's also the financial cost. So we have to think across the piece. Have we thought about the accommodation block? Do we have if you're the only Afro-Caribbean student in the whole building, that's challenging. I'm not saying that you have segregation and that you have a whole floor that's solely Afro-Caribbean, but it's actually, has any thought been made in that whole process? Have we thought about how we can try and be more inclusive? And so it's more than just a knee-jerk reaction or a tick box exercise. It's actually a whole cultural shift to allow that to occur. And those are the sort of things that universities can actually do, and some are doing, and actually just that cultural shift, so that we're not even thinking about it. I often think about Athena Swan and how we made some significant differences in breaking glass ceilings. Smoking, we were able to do it. So we just have to be careful that whenever we talk about race, or whenever we talk about agendas like this, people become very nervous, people are afraid of saying the wrong thing, and that's actually, inaction is actually worse. What I really want is for people to say, what can we do, what should we do, and ask. Just grab a bunch of students and have a real meaningful discussion, and what would make it better. And of course it's going to take time, but are those discussions even happening now? And I think that becomes really, really important.
And for me as well, Richard, it's discussions around one size doesn't fit all with mental health support. And if someone experiences mental ill health, the recovery journey, and how different people will always respond differently given their cultural heritage, how they view recovery, what might help their recovery that isn't in a Western framework.
Absolutely. And sorry, I did miss that last point of your question. The other thing is, people are nervous even today to seek help, or not even to seek help, just to say, I could really use some support, or how are you feeling? Or anybody else finding this really challenging? And there is still that stigma, which shouldn't be there, but is there. And I think having all those opportunities to openly have that conversation will really help the students. And I think we need to do far more of that. And also, it's okay not to be okay. And because most people, how are you? I'm fine. But actually, you'll know better than me that isn't actually the real response, and that's not the right question to ask. And it's how do you take that forward? And again, for our students who will come through on the Cowrie program, we want to be absolutely sure that they have that support, they have that mentorship, that they have that grouping that they can identify with, that collegiate atmosphere. Because it's if you've got true friends, you can do so much more. That's the one thing that's sort of I found throughout my life is if you've got friends who really, they don't care who you are. They don't care if you're a professor of X or you're head of department Y or you drive whatever. They like you for who you are. They talk to you for what you are and what you represent and the values and the shared lived experiences, all of that. That they are that sort of support network is invaluable. So that's why families and friends and societies and clubs and sport, all of those things, wherever you find that can make such a difference. So we have to make sure that we can try and nurture and engender that.
And I agree. I think it's easier often to suffer in silence, isn't it? And think, this is shameful. I shouldn't talk about it. I'm really lucky. I'm really privileged to be here. I don't have a right to feel anxious, low, manic, whatever someone's going through. I think it is quite hard to talk about how you're feeling, actually.
So I've got no expertise in this space, but I do know that when you say to someone, you should be really grateful for what you have, or that, well, you've got everything. You're at University X and your family's doing this and you're doing this course. That's not really how mental health works, as I understand it. It's actually far more complicated than that. And it's that nuanced and giving them the space and the opportunity to be able to share how they really feel and not be judgmental. Or, I'm outside my comfort zone here, but
it's very practical. You're absolutely spot on, and I know that you'll know from having worked with so many students over your career.
It's just people need to have space and people need to have time. And what often happens, I'm not sure if I mentioned this before, is that the opportunity to fail is often not presented, and it can be even more challenging in my experience. If you're a person of color, if you're a Black minority ethnic, the perception is often, well, look what happened. We gave them that role and they weren't able to deliver. And that can be devastating. And that's not helpful. It's very rare that I find someone saying, well, we gave them that task and they failed, so we won't give that to another non-BAME person. And that's interesting observation.
I think often people are given these jobs, aren't they? They're set up to fail, consciously, subconsciously, unconsciously, or when things are in such a mess, it's almost like, oh, look, there's a global majority Black, brown person. We can get them in and they can sort out the mess. Oh, look, they couldn't cope, so we're not doing that again. Yeah, absolutely.
I think we have to recognize that. I'm really keen. I was so fortunate here in Southampton. My dean had faith in me, gave me a number of leading roles, but also was a fantastic mentor. And that's the difference. Is I've been you have to seek them out, but I've always had, even now in my advanced years, I've always had mentors, and I'm a great believer in mentors. I think you're missing a trick if you don't have at least one or two mentors, someone that's a sounding board, someone that can listen to the thoughts you have and can just offer some, well, first of all, they can just listen, but first of all, they can just say, have you considered, without any judgment, different perspectives?
Absolutely. And on that then, I'm really hoping that people are listening. We've had a corporate social responsibility month in June on the podcast. So people want to get involved, they want to donate. So just to let everyone know, I am one of the business sponsors of the Cowrie, but they want to be a mentor, they want to be an individual donor. How can they get involved, Richard?
Oh, well, there's so many ways you can get involved. Of course, you can become a friend of Cowrie. All the information is on our website. So if you were to go along to www.cowriescholarshipfoundation.org, you'll find everything on there on how to become a friend of Cowrie, how to donate, how to become a mentor. Essentially, just make a difference, transform lives, do something positive. I often say, if 100,000 people gave us the price of a coffee, I wouldn't be having this request or this call for arms. But it's just making a difference and thinking, what did I do today? Or if someone says, what did you do when the whole George Floyd and the racism and the Black Lives Matter, what did you try and do to try and move on this agenda? It's important to say there are so many different things people can do. And of course, money is important, but you can help promote, you can help fundraise, you can be a mentor, you can be supporting, and an advocate. There are so many ways you can help and this is donors and businesses, large and small.
So if you're listening, people, please get involved. All the links are in the show notes, how you can connect with Cowrie on Twitter, Facebook. Please join Friends of Cowrie. Nay Dawson does a fantastic newsletter. You won't look back. And those of you with small businesses, it doesn't matter if we can't match big corporations, but we can absolutely do something. So I urge you to have a look and get involved. And finally, Richard, I just want to ask you, as an incredibly busy professor and running Cowrie and all the work that you do, how do you look after your own mental health and well-being? And what are your top 3 tips?
Okay. Well, first of all, my family probably say I don't switch off, so I've got to be really careful here. Okay. Well, to be fair, the family I'm very, very lucky. I have a super supportive family. The website and the Twitter and everything is my daughters Grace and Cicely brought me up to the 21st century, and so support from my family has been incredible. My wife Sonia, we've been married for 26 years, is my rock. So I'm really lucky that I have a very supportive family and a twin. So when you survive a war with your twin, that is a bond that twins are always close anyway, but it's even closer. But in terms of practical things, I do walk every single day. So someone's often said, why haven't we got a dog? Because if it's pouring with rain, if it's late at night, whatever, I walk every day. It's really important to me. I try and do exercise. I was also, when I was doing my PhD, I did something called the Canadian Air Force program.
Okay.
And this is a high impact exercise. You don't need any weights. You don't need any gym equipment. You can do it in your bedroom. It's 5-6 minutes of actually, I'll tell you the saddest thing is when I was doing it as in my 20s, it goes up to sort of chart 5 and chart 6. But alas, now I can only go to about chart 2. But anyway, the Canadian Air Force has been fantastic for me. So I walk every day. I try and do a little bit of exercise at least once a week, and I try and do the Canadian 2 or 3 times. So for me, it's a little bit of exercise. I read fiction, and it has to be the right type of fiction. Anything by Anne Tyler or
I love Anne Tyler.
So I think I've just about everything she's written. That sort of pure escapism is what I really relish. So those are sort of 2 things, and the company of good friends makes a big difference.
Oh, thank you. That's really helpful. And I mean, if any of you get to meet Richard or see him, he looks incredibly trim. So yes, I'm not surprised that you do all this exercise. You look amazing. Also, it's good
the checks in the post.
I'm also guessing it's good for bone health, isn't it? So given that,
let's close the cycle. Loading. So for all your listeners out there, if you avoided taking the stairs, it would do wonders for your bone. Of course, those of you beyond a certain age, it's probably a little bit too late. But for your younger listeners, build up your bone density right up into your 30s. It'll be wonders to help reduce your osteoporosis.
Brilliant. And that is a good way to end. But please do check everything out. I honestly, the minute I heard about Cowrie, and I can't remember how it came to my attention, I think maybe someone had mentioned it to me. I was thinking, how have I not heard of this? So hopefully that's you. Hopefully we spread the word, share the podcast, share the links, have a look, get involved. And remember, there's always something you can do. And we look forward to seeing you and you hearing us in the next episode. So until then, everyone, take care.
Oh, thank you so much.
It was great to have you, Richard. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.